So, it's been a minute since we've had our favorite furry asshole in the frame, but this is Sinatra if you are new to this channel, and today we're going to talk about Mortality and all of my mixed feelings around They Both Die at the End by Adam Silvera. Now, this is an incredibly popular book, something that I've seen be beloved across Book Talk and Bookstagram and all over this platform, which kind of leads me to believe that my opinion on it may not be perhaps the most popular. Now, so here's some backstory on They Both Die at the End. I've owned this book for a smooth 3 or 4 years. I got it years ago off of Google Play, and it has sat on my computer since because on multiple occasions I have tried to read it and couldn't make it past the first chapter, which is odd for me. As y'all know, I don't tend to DNF books, but even though I could not get into this, I kept it. I didn't get rid of it, and a few days ago I read the entire thing in one sitting, which is strange. Not me reading an entire book in one sitting, but me being so invested in a story, I felt I had to finish it in that moment, despite not caring about it for years prior. So, if you are unfamiliar with this book, They Both Die at the End exists in a world in which everyone knows the day, but not the time and not the method of their death. They are notified within 24 hours of their impending death, and there is nothing they can do to stop it. So the story starts with Mateo and Rufus, 2 teenage boys who receive the notice from Deathcast that they are going to die that day. They end up meeting each other via an app called Last Friend, which connects people who are about to die with others in their community, people who don't have friends or family to spend their time with. And the story goes throughout the next 24 hours with very specific timestamps of all of the growth and exploration and closure and new experiences that Mateo and Rufus have together. In addition, the chapters are interspersed with points of view from various characters in the story. And initially, I wasn't sure what the purpose of those points of view were until I realized that all of them were connected. An individual who is a graffiti artist is the reason that Rufus downloaded the app in the first place, because he saw her graffiti. A famous actor who happens to be in the adaptation of Mateo's favorite books ends up dying because a group of boys was sprinting across the street after Rufus and caused a car accident. And there are all these different ways in which these characters are intertwined. And what I found so fascinating about this book, something I genuinely loved, is the concept of the death cast and what that would mean for society. There's even a good amount of time spent on 2 characters who actually are death cast operators, and various characters in this book question who would want to spend their life telling other people that they're about to die. What does that do to your psyche? What does that do for the way you interact with other people, your coworkers, and yourself when you know what it feels like to give the call, but not necessarily to receive a call? I really enjoyed that. But by that same token, there were so many other moments I felt like the world building could have been explored. I mean, these 2 boys, Mateo and Rufus, are going all around the city and get into a ridiculous number of situations over the course of a day. And I felt like there were so many missed opportunities to explore what does it mean for public transportation? What does it mean for hospitals? What does it mean for housing? What does it mean when everyone is notified 25 hours before their death? Like, yes, it makes sense to me that there would be a structure and organization that would notify people of these things. It absolutely makes sense to me that someone would create an app where it called Necro, where you could have sex with people before they die. But besides that, how else does it affect their lives? How else does it affect their finances and the way industries operate? And I'm not saying that this book should have been so much about the world building that we miss the personal relationships between individuals, which are the heart, the driving force of it. But just, I felt like there were missed opportunities in where that world building could be explored. And another thing I'll say is that while I loved the queer rep, I love the fact that Mateo and Rufus are both Latino, and there are a variety of diverse characters in this story, I do feel after reading it and after hearing so much from other people who loved it, that the queer rep and the representation for POC may be overshadowing certain elements that would not be quite as excused in another text. And that, as I said, everything on the channel, one person, one opinion, but the way that the individual characters spoke to each other, specifically Mateo and Rufus, who you spend the majority of the time with, was hard for me. Like, yes, I understood that going into this book, there probably was going to be this like Carpe Diem type theme to it, 2 people on their last day to live. Yes, I understood going into it that this was going to be a romance. There was going to be some sort of romantic connection between them, and that was going to happen in a day. There were various points where I was just like, okay, like I work with undergraduate students, and so I'm not going to say that I alone know what 17 and 18-year-old boys talk like, because I don't. But there were certain moments where I was just like, this feels so convenient for the author to say what he's trying to say to the audience, as opposed to the characters themselves. And also there were certain inclusions of slang and certain references that again kind of pulled me out of the story. I am not an 18-year-old Cuban boy or a 18-year-old Puerto Rican boy living in New York, so who am I to say that there are no boys that speak in this way, whether it's incredibly poetic and philosophical or whether it's the way that they incorporate slang into their daily speech. But because like the majority of this book are the conversations between these two people as they're getting to know each other and reaching some sense of closure and trying to say goodbye to their family and friends, things that are in the flow of conversation that pull me out of it do matter. But that all being said, this book had a very intense emotional impact on me. And I don't know if it's because we are living in a time in which it is even more front and center that people are dying too young, that people are dying regardless of whether they did everything right. And specifically, I'm thinking about the pandemic. Like, there are people who have been vaccinated and boosted and wearing their masks and staying out of public spaces and still catching COVID and dying. And while I would argue that throughout history, pre and post pandemic, we can find examples of people we think died too young, or people we think who didn't deserve to die, even though, I mean, what does that mean to deserve to die? Something about seeing these two characters who are at the very beginning of their lives kind of wrestle with the unfairness of it all, and kind of wrestle with the idea that truly there is nothing they can do, that really struck me, and that was very emotional for me. In addition, I am not someone who really reads romance books, and I'm not someone who normally watches romance movies. So perhaps this section of the review, take it with a grain of salt. But while I am not someone who believes that you can fall in love with someone in a day, I do believe that their characters believed it, if that makes sense. Like, in the scene in which they finally kiss, in the scenes in which they confess their feelings for each other, some of the language made me cringe and pulled me out of it, but overall it felt very sincere and felt very beautiful to me. And I believed as a viewer, as an outside third party, that Mateo and Rufus meant what they were saying, even if, generally speaking, you know, my hard line is the sand is no, I don't believe in love at first sight or falling in love in such a short amount of time. So maybe that makes me a curmudgeon. Maybe if I was someone who was able to kind of like lose myself in that fantasy, or if I was someone who believed in soulmates, that kind of relationship would have impacted me more. But I enjoyed it, but it wasn't something that made me, you know, burst out into tears like apparently a lot of people did when they read this book. But I think one of the main reasons this book stuck with me so much, beyond the fact that I was very, very heavily connecting the experiences of these two fictional characters to the experiences of people that I've like witnessed in this pandemic, were the conversations around fate and free will. So in this book, they make it clear that even people who did their absolute best to, you know, avoid whatever situation or avoid individuals that they felt would contribute to their death, they still died regardless, period. Even though they make it very clear that those deaths are inevitable, it is not clear whether everyone's entire lives are decided by fate. So there's a map actually in the back of this book that shows a web of all the characters that you hear from in the story, all the points of view, and you see how they're all connected to each other. Also, throughout the plot of the story, you see instances in which someone who got the call that they are going to die that day survives a car accident and survives falling in the street and survives a bombing, but then dies later. So it makes you wonder, oh, is it not just the fact that they're going to die this day, it's that they're going to die out of a specific way? And then similar to that scene in The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, where the female lead, I forget her name, is in a car accident, and the movie shows you every single tiny little thing that led up to her and the car being there at the exact time. It makes you wonder, are these characters, are their entire lives set out on this predetermined track if they're going to die at a specific time and on a specific date? And if so, what does that then mean for relationships? So there are relationships in this book that are friendship, that are romantic. There are relationships that are, I guess I'll say, attempt to be sexual but fail. There are like familial relationships, found family things. And throughout the reading of this book, I kept seeing what I perceived to be as personal choice, choosing to break up with someone or stay with them, choosing to kiss them or not, choosing to share your love or not, choosing to put yourself in harm's way to protect someone that you love like a brother. And yet, when you get to the end of the book and see all the ways these things are connected, it makes me wonder, were any of those choices real? Like, if there's a character who dies in this book because he's in a car accident that's caused by a group of kids running across the street, and those kids are running after a specific person that beat up one of those kids for dating that person's ex, does that mean if those two people never broke up, we'd never be in that situation? And like, you see some of the characters kind of talk about these things, but understandably, when you have one day to live, and here's the thing too, it's not just like, oh, you're guaranteed 24 hours. It's some time within the next 24 hours. It could be 15 minutes before when you get the call. It could be 23 hours from when you get the call. So I can understand an individual who has that limited amount of time left, not wanting to spend it all like philosophizing or whatnot, but I still found that really interesting because part of my investment in this story, part of my investment in the relationship, platonic, romantic, and otherwise, between Mateo and Rufus was my belief that they did this. They chose this. If they hadn't gone on the app, if they hadn't taken a chance, if they hadn't learned to be honest with each other, if they hadn't used the time that they had to do things that really matter to them and connect with the people they love, they would not have been able to learn these things about themselves and not be able to find that connection in each other. That is what I believed. And then we get to the end of the book and I'm like, oh, I'm seeing the webs of how all these things are connected. I'm seeing how these specific deaths trace back to things that happened 12 chapters ago. And again, it makes me wonder, is all of this just a big clock? Has all of this been wound by some cosmic hand, God, aliens, the government, whatever, and people are just following along on their tracks? Because perhaps this is just me, but if these characters exist in a world in which they don't have free will, in which their choices don't matter, and their deaths, in addition to their entire lives, are predetermined, that makes the beauty and the magic and the miracle of finding a connection with another human being, again, platonic, romantic, or familial, less important to me. And now in my own personal life, when I look at my friends and my family and my partner, if someone told me, hey, this was all predetermined, this was all written by some cosmic hand, that wouldn't make me stop loving those people. That wouldn't make me stop caring about those people. So again, I can understand why the characters in the book don't dwell too much on whether or not all of this is fate, but as an outside reader, it did pull me out. I don't know if Adam Silvera, the author, went into it with the intent to imply, oh, the death is predetermined, but their lives aren't. Or if they went in with the intent to imply, yes, their death is determined and their entire lives are. I don't know what his goal was. Or maybe he meant it to be ambiguous. But I got the impression, based on the contents of the story, that it's not just when and where you're going to die. It's also all of the things that lead up to that, aka your lives and the lives of other people, especially in the cases of this book in which people are killed by murder, a deliberate act of malice and cruelty of another person. So this book has a lot to unpack. I think it has a lot of really interesting, intense themes, and although it's not something that I can see myself like rushing to reread, as an educator, I would love to read this in a class with my undergraduate students or with high school students, because I don't think there are that many books, and also maybe I shouldn't say this, I don't read a lot of YA, but I feel like we don't as often read books in school that explicitly talk about what it means to be young, to be afraid of your mortality, to know what it's like to lose family members and friends and just experience those kinds of struggles but still try to make a life that's worth living. Like, I feel like this book, in addition to the queer rep, a healthy relationship and a non-predatory relationship between queer characters, which is so hard to find, unfortunately. All of the diverse characters who are white and black and Cuban and Puerto Rican, I loved that. And again, I wish these things weren't rare, but unfortunately when it comes to the gatekeepers, they tend to try to just push through the same types of stories with the same types of people. Like, all of these things, I think, could lead to such great discussion in a classroom around fate, around free will, around love and affection and family, and the concept of found family, which is very heavy in this, and I love. I love reading about people who have an incredibly intense bond that's not decided by blood. So many of those things, I think, so many of those conversations could spring out of this book, and yet I don't think the book is that great. But by the same token, maybe because it had an emotional impact on me and it got me thinking about these things, maybe those two things alone, in addition to the representation, I do think the representation is important. Maybe those three things, the way it made me feel, the way it's causing me to think, and the fact that I think it has really good representation, maybe those three things mean it is a great book. I mean, come on, who and how do we decide what is and isn't good literature? It's just a struggle for me because I have read so many other books this year and so many other books in my life in which I was more invested in the characters, in which I really loved the world building, in which not just the topic they were writing about, but the way they strung words together just like got me in the heart, or maybe want to like highlight it and be like, yes, this is writing. They Both Die at the End is not one of those books for me. And it makes me curious to read another text by Adam Silvera because I genuinely don't think that I would enjoy his writing style as much. I don't think I would enjoy the way he describes his characters and the way he tries to get the audience invested in them if this story wasn't set in such a fascinating world. And also considering the fact that I tried to read this on multiple occasions before and couldn't get into it, I think the timing of me reading this book matters as well. If I wasn't reading it in the middle of a global pandemic, I don't know if I would have the same feeling. But I guess the only way I'll know that is if I read it again, so maybe I will. But now you can see why I titled this something Mortality and Mixed Feelings, because I have a lot of mixed feelings. And I'm sure you can see, once again, why I don't rate books, because how the hell would I rate this? Rate this on how much it made me feel, rate it on how it made me think, rate it on like the actual characters themselves or the way that which they were written, because those scores would be all over the place. So if you're someone who adores this book, please know I am not knocking you for loving it. I just can't hold it in the same level of high regard as it seems other people can. But I do think that the concept of the story itself, I do think the representation, and I do think the themes and topics it tackles are really, really interesting and really valuable. So I'm going to try to end there because I feel like I've been rambling long enough. I have no idea if this was helpful or interesting, but in the spirit of trying to, one, do more single book reviews, since I do very much enjoy them, and two, get more comfortable with sharing mixed, messy feelings as opposed to thing good or thing bad, here is a video about They Both Die at the End by Adam Silvera. And as always, I will see you next time. Bye.